Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The prophecy had been clear, crystal clear in its devastating warning. The world would end, and nothing could stop it except one woman, the prophet Elira. Her visions had saved the kingdoms from disaster more times than anyone could count. But now, when the world needed her most, she had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was more than just mysterious, it was terrifying. Kingdoms scrambled to find her, sending their best warriors, magicians, and rogues into the wild in a desperate bid to bring her back. The prophecy was unfolding, the end was creeping closer, and the future had never been so uncertain. Gorith looked out over the edge of the great chasm that separated the wilderness from the known world. The jagged cliffs stretched into a thick, enchanted fog that seemed to go on forever. The warrior's scarred hands tightened around the hilt of his sword, a familiar weight that had saved his life countless times. Beside him, Elira leaned against a tree, her arms crossed over her chest. The rogue had the easy air of someone who was always ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail of the landscape. She said nothing, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. Behind them, Thalen, the mage, muttered to himself as he traced invisible patterns in the air. His long, flowing robes, marked with intricate magical symbols, rippled as if caught in an unseen wind. Thalen's arrogance was palpable. He believed magic could solve everything, even the end of the world. And then there was Leora, the priestess. Her presence was the glue that kept them all together, though it was a tenuous bond. Leora's faith radiated from her like a warm light, but even she seemed weighed down by the gravity of their mission. The four of them had been tasked with the impossible, to find Elira, the last prophet, before the world came crashing down. And while none of them would admit it, each harbored doubts. The wilderness, Gorith finally said, his voice gruff and low. It's like stepping into the unknown. It's not just the wilderness, Elira replied, her voice sharp. It's the magic in it. The air feels wrong. Thalen snorted, clearly unimpressed. Magic is the least of our problems. If we don't find Elira, there won't be anything left for magic to save. Leora stepped forward, her hands folded in silent prayer. We have to trust that she is out there, waiting for us. The gods will guide us. Gorith remained silent, his eyes scanning the distance. Trust. It was a word that had lost meaning for him long ago. But they had no choice. The prophecy had already begun, he'd seen it with his own eyes. A star had fallen from the sky, just as the prophet had predicted. It was the first of many omens, and they had no time to waste. Let's move, he grunted, turning to face the path that led into the mist. The longer we wait, the closer the end comes. The group set off, leaving behind the safety of the known world and stepping into the wilderness. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath their feet crackled with the remnants of ancient magic. Every step they took felt like a gamble, and none of them knew what they might encounter next. The wilderness was a place of untamed magic, a land where time itself seemed to bend and twist. They moved cautiously, each member of the group keeping their senses alert. Gorith led the way, his warrior's instincts guiding him through the dense undergrowth. Elira moved silently at his side, her footsteps as light as a shadow's. Thalen followed, muttering incantations under his breath, while Leora brought up the rear, her staff glowing faintly with divine light. Hours passed in silence, the group navigating the treacherous terrain with growing unease. The further they ventured, the stronger the magic became. Strange lights flickered in the distance, and whispers seemed to rise from the very ground beneath them. It was as if the wilderness itself was alive, watching their every move. We're being followed, Elara said suddenly, her voice low but tense. Gorith didn't stop walking, but his hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. I know. Thalen glanced over his shoulder, his brow furrowed. I don't see anything. You wouldn't, Elara replied, her tone clipped. But I can feel it. Leora quickened her pace to catch up with the others. Could it be one of the creatures from Elira's prophecy? Gorith shook his head. No. Whatever it is, it's staying hidden. For now. They continued on, the tension in the air growing thicker with each passing minute. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Gorith stopped in his tracks, holding up a hand to signal the others. Something's coming, he muttered. The tremor grew stronger, and before they could react, the earth split open in front of them. From the depths of the chasm, a monstrous creature emerged, its massive, scaly body covered in jagged rocks and glowing runes. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, and its roar shook the trees around them. A guardian, Leora whispered, her face pale. A beast of prophecy, Thalen corrected, his eyes alight with anticipation. Stand back. I'll handle this. Before anyone could stop him, the mage stepped forward, raising his hands high. A torrent of energy erupted from his palms, striking the creature with blinding force. The ground shook, and the beast staggered, but it didn't fall. Thalen, wait, Gorith began, but it was too late. With a deafening roar, the guardian lashed out, its massive claws tearing through the air. Thalen's spell shattered, and the mage was thrown backward, crashing into a tree. Gorith cursed under his breath, drawing his sword. We need to fight this thing together. Elara was already moving, darting around the creature with lightning speed. Her daggers flashed as she slashed at its legs, trying to find a weak point. Leora stood back, chanting a prayer of protection as a shimmering shield formed around them. Gorith charged forward, his sword swinging in a powerful arc. The blade connected with the creature's side, but the guardian barely flinched. It turned its burning eyes toward him, and Gorith braced himself for the impact. Before the beast could strike, Leora's voice rang out, clear and strong. By the light of the gods, be gone. A radiant beam of divine energy shot from her staff, striking the creature in the chest. The guardian roared in pain, its body convulsing as the magic took hold. For a moment, it seemed as though the light would overwhelm it, but then, with a final, defiant roar, the creature collapsed into a pile of ash and stone. The group stood in stunned silence, the echoes of the battle still ringing in their ears. That was close, Elara muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Thalen staggered to his feet, his face pale and his robe torn. I had it under control. Sure you did, Gorith grunted, sheathing his sword. Let's keep moving before something worse shows up. Leora stepped forward, her expression calm but weary. We're on the right path. The temple isn't far now. They pressed on, the landscape growing more twisted and surreal with each step. The magic of the wilderness was growing stronger, warping reality around them. Trees with glowing leaves reached out like twisted hands, and strange creatures flitted through the shadows. By the time they reached the hidden temple, the group was exhausted. The structure stood at the center of a clearing, its ancient stone walls covered in cryptic runes. It was a place of power, untouched by time. This is it, Leora whispered. The temple where Elira sought guidance. They approached cautiously, stepping through the archway into the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with magic, and the walls seemed to hum with energy. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and lying upon it was the prophet herself, Elira. She looked weak, her once glowing eyes dull and tired. Her skin was pale, and her breathing was shallow. But despite her frailty, there was still an undeniable power radiating from her. "You found me," Elira said, her voice barely a whisper. Leora rushed to her side, her hands glowing with healing light. "We're here to help you." Elira shook her head weakly. "It's too late for me. The curse, it's too strong." Goreth stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "We need you, Elira. The world is ending." The prophet's eyes flickered with sadness. "I know. I've seen it. But my final prophecy, it wasn't about me. It was about you." Thalen frowned, his arms crossed. "What are you talking about?" Elira's gaze swept over the group, her voice growing fainter with each word. "The prophecy wasn't about me stopping the end. It was about you. Each of you holds the key to changing the future." Goretha's grip tightened on his sword. "How?" "One of you must make a sacrifice," Elira whispered. "Something you hold dear. Only then can the future be altered." The group fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a dark cloud. Thalen scoffed, shaking his head. "I refuse to believe that. Magic can fix this. We don't need to make sacrifices." Elira's eyes narrowed. "You would say that?" Goreth looked down at the prophet, his heart heavy. "What kind of sacrifice?" Elira's eyes locked onto his. "The choice is yours." Leora knelt beside Elira, her voice soft. "We've come this far. There has to be a way." "There is," Elira whispered. "But it requires more than magic. More than faith. It requires you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Goreth, ever the stoic warrior, stepped forward. He had failed before, and it haunted him every day. But this was his chance to make things right. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The others turned to him, surprise and confusion etched on their faces. "What are you saying?" Elira asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Goreth met her gaze, his expression resolute. "If a sacrifice is what it takes to save the world, then I'll make it." Thalen scoffed again, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. "You don't even know what you're giving up." Goreth shook his head. "I don't need to. I've lost enough in my life. What's one more thing if it means the world survives?" Leora's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. She understood the gravity of his decision. Elira, her strength fading, smiled weakly. "Thank you, Goreth. Your sacrifice will change everything." As the warrior stepped forward, the air in the temple shifted. The runes on the walls glowed brighter, and the magic that had once felt so oppressive and now seemed to hum with purpose. With a final, determined breath, Goreth placed his hand on the pedestal. The moment he did, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he felt the weight of his sacrifice settle in his chest, but it wasn't painful. It was freeing. The magic that had once threatened to destroy the world bent and twisted, reshaping itself into something new. The future was no longer set in stone. The prophecy had been rewritten. As the energy faded, Goreth stepped back, his body exhausted but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. "It's done," Elira whispered, her voice barely audible. Leora knelt beside her, her hands glowing with healing light. But it was too late. The prophet's eyes fluttered closed, and with a final breath, she was gone. The group stood in silence, the weight of what had just transpired hanging over them. Thalen, for once, had no snide remarks. Elira looked away, her expression unreadable. And Leora, though heartbroken, radiated a quiet peace. Goreth sheathed his sword, his eyes fixed on the place where Elira had lain. "We've saved the world," he said quietly. But the cost, Leora placed a hand on his shoulder. The future is never set in stone, Gorith. You've given us all a chance. That's more than anyone could ask for. As they left the temple, the weight of their journey finally lifting, Gorith allowed himself a small, bittersweet smile. The world had been saved. But some things, he knew, would never be the same.